In this lesson, we're going to explore computer worms. Now, a worm is a piece of malicious software, much like a virus, that can replicate itself without any user intervention. Now, the key difference here between a virus and a worm is that a virus requires a user to take some action, such as opening a file, clicking on a malicious web link, or connecting a mass storage device to your system. But a worm, on the other hand, can actually replicate itself and spread throughout your network without a user's consent or their action. Now, this occurs because a worm will take advantage of vulnerabilities in our operating systems and applications if our organizations don't mitigate these vulnerabilities by selecting the appropriate security controls and performing appropriate security patching. So, if a worm can scan your network and determine that one of your workstations is missing a security patch, that worm can take advantage of that vulnerability and then use it to spread from victim to victim across the network and across the world. Now, worms are very dangerous for two different reasons. First, they're dangerous because they can infect your workstation and other computing assets. But they're also really dangerous because they can cause disruption to your normal network traffic because they're constantly trying to replicate and spread themselves across the network. This begins to consume not just our network resources, but also consumes compute power, processing power, memory power, and network capacity, which will slow down your system and your overall network. If the replication is occurring too rapidly, for example, this can actually cause a denial of service attack against your network and its associated servers. Now, worms are best known for spreading far and wide over the internet in a relatively short amount of time. Even as far back as 2001, there was a worm named Nimda, which is basically admin spelled backwards. Now, Nimda was able to propagate against the entire internet in just 22 minutes, which is really impressive, especially because most internet connections back then were extremely slow and relied upon dial-up modems. Now, there's another major worm that we saw back in 2009, and this one was called Conficker. Now, Conficker is probably one of the largest worms that we've seen to date as cybersecurity professionals because it was able to infect between 9 and 15 million machines. This worm was going through and infecting as many machines as it could find, and all these machines were missing a critical security patch for the Windows operating system, specifically the Microsoft patch known as 08-067. Now, this security patch was designed to solve a software vulnerability inside the way Windows was doing file and printer sharing. Conficker would actively scan every resource on an infected organization's internal network as well as across the internet, and whenever it found a machine without that security patch installed, it would then execute some malicious code to take over that infected machine and add it to a larger botnet that the attacker could then use for other malicious purposes. Now, luckily, cybersecurity professionals were able to shut down the attacker's botnet before it was used for any malicious or nefarious purposes. But Conficker does show the true power of how far and wide these worms can spread, especially when you're using an internet-connected system. So remember, a worm is a piece of malicious software that can self-replicate without any user interaction. This is the key difference between a virus and a worm because a virus requires some kind of user action, like opening a file, clicking on a malicious web link, or connecting a malicious storage device to your system to cause the system to get infected in the first place. Worms, though, will simply continually search out a new network connection and scan any resources it finds to try and exploit some kind of known vulnerability in order to take over that machine and infect it as well as infecting your network.